This week on the Faculty Factory podcast.
If someone's agreed to be your mentor, you've just gotten a gift. You need to treat the gift with respect. And that person doesn't need to be tracking you down.
Right.
You need to be setting up the meetings. And There's good literature that shows that when the mentee drives the relationship, those are the best relationships. And so I think even telling a mentor, just because you agree doesn't mean you've made a lifetime commitment to somebody. And if they're not responsive, then, it may be a time to say, look, let's review expectations. I don't have time in life to be tracking you down, and bugging you about deadlines and those sort of things. That's not the world we live in anymore, if it ever was.
Welcome back to the Faculty Factory podcast. On today's episode, we have Dr. David A. Rogers from the University of Alabama. Dr. Rogers, will you tell us all your titles? I know you have a lot of them.
Yeah, so I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and Professional Development, and in the last year I was also named the UAB Medicine Chief Wellness Officer.
That's quite a lot of hats. Let's back this train up and tell everybody your personal story. How did you, first of all, transition into the faculty affairs role?
So I am a pediatric general surgeon, and so I did the requisite decade of postgraduate training to get to do that. And I had started in my first full-time faculty position in 1994, and I fully intended to practice surgery and also to have a lab. I don't know why I thought that. I had done some clinical and translational research. I had never really done much bench research, and so it's pretty naive as I look back in retrospect, but I just thought that's what academic surgeons did. And so I had some startup money, and I worked with a really brilliant physician scientist for a couple of years, and I realized that while I love taking care of patients, I just didn't love that kind of research. And so about my third year on the faculty, said, well, what is it that I do love? And what I felt that I really loved was taking care of patients with teaching. I felt like I had been extravagantly well trained to be a clinical surgeon, but that I didn't know anything at all about teaching. And so I began taking some courses in surgical education, which firmly convinced me that I didn't know anything about teaching. And during that time, had became the clerkship director. When my department chair approached me and it said, "It seems like that the students hate you the least of all of us. How would you like to be the clerkship director?" And I said, well, that sounds like a great thing to do. And so went on and got a master's degree in health professions education and began doing educational research. And as part of that, began to do some faculty development, which I really enjoyed. And so, I've had a consistent interest in teaching. I firmly believe that education is a way that we can transform, most reliably transform people and groups of people. And as I've gotten older, of course, as an old clerkship director, the students then became my faculty. It feels more and more comfortable. And so that was my original position here, was the Senior Associate Dean of Faculty Development. And because I have just really enjoyed doing faculty development. Have been doing it nationally for many years, principally with surgeons who find themselves in their first educational role and are self-aware enough to know that they need, to get some expertise in how to manage their programs.
Mm-hmm. And then how did this chief wellness officer role sneak up on you?
Yeah, so I came here expecting to do faculty development, and I do co-direct a thing called the Healthcare Leadership Academy, which I really enjoy, and that's around my conviction that we do a poor job of preparing people for a leadership role in academics. We typically take people that are good at research, are good at patient care, and then we elevate them into leadership roles, and then without any preparation. And so I did that for the first year, but I struggled because I found that at least here, the faculty were so busy that there really wasn't much interest in doing workshops and things that I had traditionally done. During that time, my predecessor in the role was Kathy Nelson, who had restricted her focus primarily to faculty development, but I began getting people coming to me saying, hey, we need somebody who's a faculty member to be involved in our promotion and tenure process and then the grievance process. And so I said, okay, well, I'm not sure I would have ever been attracted to those roles, but I could certainly see that rationally it was helpful to have a faculty member involved in those sort of faculty activities. So in the first 2 years, I sort of balanced my activity. And as I mentioned, I don't know that, if they had come to me and said, hey, your job is going to be to create processes and policies for faculty, that I ever would have taken that job. But I came to understand the value of it, that it's creating those processes is a way to help people. It's a very kind of abstract way to help them. But, I began to see that the faculty affairs role and the faculty development role could be connected. And so as long as I could do professional development, I said, okay, I'll balance it. The wellness portfolio came about because I was involved in the faculty engagement survey, and we began to see people expressing higher and higher degrees of distress related to their faculty experience and the stress related to their jobs and encumbrances. And so I really began sort of focusing around this issue of faculty stress in about 2014. And then in the last year, we had the good fortune that a malpractice insurance company called ProAssurance wanted to endow a chair. So that really served as a catalyst to, I think, bring even more visibility to the problem of burnout among all of our faculty, including physicians and researchers. So and I feel like that this is something that has been interesting. I've, been advocating for the chief wellness officer role, but I think proper credit should be given to some of our colleagues in the group on faculty affairs who have been trying to raise alarm around the faculty experience for a couple of decades. I mean, the recent work done on faculty vitality is, to me, just another way to say, this is kind of where we want our faculty to be. So whether you call it engagement or vitality, I think we're talking about the same things. And so I really hope to work myself out of the chief wellness officer role, because I really feel like that my aspiration is that all of our leaders would just be more enlightened about the impact that our programs and policies and really senior leadership decisions have on faculty. And so a lot of the models that relate to how people's work can burn them out, I think we need to, all of our leaders, whether they're the CEOs or the deans or the chief financial officer, some sort of awareness of these models would be really helpful. And then I don't know that we need yet another sort of administrator running around. And I've taken the approach of trying to be collaborative with all my counterparts while I do have the individual title, and I try to use it to affect change. Again, this is really a problem that the GFA has been pointing to for a long time. And so I wanted to keep it combined with my role because, to me, I felt like that was a natural, connection. So.
When you first started as a senior associate dean, was that your entree right as senior associate dean? What was your percent effort? Well, how did that evolve? Or has your...
Yeah. It's a great question. So I was at SIU, where I had gone to do educational scholarship and programming, and had a great time there, but my clinical situation collapsed, and I'm married to an incredibly brilliant physician scientist who has an exercise intervention in women with breast cancer. And she, so when my situation became untenable, we decided to go out and look for jobs. And so I always before my job had been the principal job because I was full-time, and Laura had become part-time when my sons were young, and she had gradually expanded her effort back. So we said in this job, she can be the leading, the target, as they say, and I'll be the trailing spouse. And so I came here trying to be flexible about what I might do. And, but as I said, we were really excited that she had a great job with a cancer center and with wonderful collaborators at a much larger institution. And then the faculty development, again, is something that I had really loved. So we felt extremely fortunate to be in a senior faculty role, to be able to come in. Now, the first few months I was here, with the senior associate dean title, I used to say, well, do you know why I'm the senior associate dean? And people would say no. And I say, because there isn't any junior associate dean. And so Kathy Nelson was really the first person in my role, and even having someone who's really focused around faculty is a fairly new thing at UAB. Between the two of us, there's only been someone probably for 12 or 13 years. And prior to that, most of the faculty activities were managed by the administrative group within the dean's office. So we didn't really have a model of having people, faculty level individuals that were involved in sort of faculty activities. So that's been good, but it's also been challenging. I do occasionally get envious of some of the places that have really large teams. Although I'm aware some of them, like me, are, part-time and they're doing other things as well, which I think there's some really good positive outcomes when we're all out and about and doing the work that faculty are doing and don't become too, sequestered. So I continue to practice, half-time. What I did give up when I came here was my research. I had the great opportunity at SIU to have wonderful collaborators in educational research, and I just decided that, to take on these other administrative responsibilities, that I wouldn't be able to be that involved in research.
Mm-hmm. So your 50% effort in your faculty affairs, faculty development, chief wellness officer role combined?
That's correct. That's correct.
Got it. Now, can you describe for us what that faculty affairs, professional development office looks like in terms of number, who does what, how many people are there? All of our offices are so different, and I think people are always curious as to how big or small these offices are. How many folks you have?
So we have 3 people. We have one gentleman, David Chaplin, who was the chairman of the Department of Microbiology, and he is a scientist, and so he is an associate dean of faculty development, and he primarily works in our CCTS and helps with the development of both physician scientists and the research scientists. And he, for example, has a program on mentoring that we offer and does a variety of other activities. And then Sandy Frazier she's actually a physician with an addiction training who many years ago had lobbied for the development of an office called the Professional Development Office. And she does a variety of activities. She does a lot of one-on-one counseling and is just revered around here for that role. And she's full-time in that role, so she's given up her practice. And David don't think does any research. So both of them are pretty much full-time in their roles. They kind of loosely report to me as more of a coordinating activity, but that's our office. We have some staff support to run our awards program. We have a Dean's Excellence Awards, and we try to provide some facilitation for some of the national awards. So we have a staff person that helps with that.
Mm-hmm. And what is the promotion and tenure? Where does that sit? Who does that stuff?
Yeah, so I do that, and we have our group here is called the Faculty Council. It's kind of a combination of what I've seen at some other institutions. So we don't have a School of Medicine level faculty senate. We have a university level senate. This group serves as the representatives from the various regional campuses and departments within the school, but also their main function is to serve as the appointment, promotion, and tenure group. And so I'm a big believer that that group of faculty should be the holders of the standards, and then I provide administrative support along with part of our HR group in terms of managing the process and giving advice. But I don't. Occasionally, we have an appeals process. So if a portfolio comes up and is declined, then people can appeal, and occasionally it goes to the dean. I get more involved, if it gets to that level. Yeah. But mostly, I tell the dean that I don't believe he should interfere with a decision made by the council unless there's new information or some compelling reason. I think we have to really be respectful that the faculty are the best group to hold those standards. We see the chairs for really good reasons, kind of try to push the limits of some of the definitions. They're trying to retain talented faculty or recruit people. And so many of them are completely supportive of the standards, but with others, I think they see it as a strategic resource. And so the council doesn't have that inherent conflict of interest. They can just say these are the standards, and so but it's an interesting world to live in.
Yeah. How many faculty do you have in Alabama?
So we have about 1,600 in the School of Medicine. The great majority, about 1,100, are physicians or physician scientists. And then we have a fairly large group of full-time research scientists. Of course, nobody's getting to do one thing anymore. So most of our researchers also teach.
Can you share a little in wisdom and inspire us? Tell us something you do that you're uniquely excited about, or anything innovative or unique or different. What's going on up in your head you're thinking you're doing now, you want to do in the future?
Yeah, so at my stage of the game, and once you reach what I call the terminal faculty status of being a full professor and tenured, then to me you have the luxury of beginning to kind of think about, what do you want your life to be about? And what has always excited me is helping younger people. The advantage of getting older is, of course, that population grows and grows. But I think it's one of the things that's attracted me to pediatric surgery. Is one of the things that still brings me joy, training fellows and residents. And now, it's about helping young faculty and young leaders. The thing that I'm most passionate about is the leadership development part, because as I sit in my role, I see what the capacity of leaders does to the follower groups. And every year, when we do faculty engagement surveys, we can see groups that are flourishing because they have really outstanding leaders. And we have some department chairs that are really outstanding. We have several that, no matter what I think I'm doing that's really novel, they're already ahead of me and pushing out. And, we definitely see an impact of faculty when a chair retires and they have an interim, and they get very anxious about who's coming. And so, I still think that academic medicine, needs to do some soul searching about how we prepare people. I think the military model is one that we should look at, where my understanding in the military is that when you're in a leadership role, they're concurrently trying to help you be successful in your role, but they're also talking about what is your next role and how can we get ready for you to be successful in that role, as you're in the current role. And I don't think we do that nearly as well as we should in academic medicine. So that's the thing where I have the biggest passion is helping what I call the emerging leaders, people that are right on that, they've either just been put in a role or they're even contemplating being put in a role. And that's where I really enjoy my work. And we do it with the School of Business, but I just see that these people get really excited about what are fairly fundamental concepts in leadership. Now, we have a leadership development officer, and she does a bunch of things. She's been primarily focused on the chairs, and obviously they're critically important. But that's a thing that I would encourage anyone who's not doing. If you really want to help the faculty, there's a couple of things I think that you can do pretty consistently, but one is helping their leaders be as capable as possible. To me is a way to really help the broader faculty in a very effective way. The other area where I've really focused and had mixed success as with it, just about everything I've done, but is around the topic of mentorship. And when I came here, I was pretty intimidated with the prospects of how do I help 1,600 faculty scattered at 4 differences and all different types. And I really think promoting mentorship is the one thing that we can consistently do. We do find that at least at UAB, the chairs will have a fair amount of autonomy. And so they're really important. I hear that in some institutions, chairs feel like they're mid-level managers and don't have much autonomy. That's not the case here. So the chairs may be particularly important at UAB, but when the chairs have gotten excited about mentorship and facilitated it and recognized that we've seen the faculty satisfaction with mentorship go up, and concurrently we see their overall engagement go up. And to me, the literature is pretty compelling that mentorship is the one thing that you can do. And really, it's just, I realize the challenge that the faculty everywhere are so busy, they get kind of grumpy when you go to them and say, hey, what about taking mentors? And so I've been advocating for mentor teams for a lot of reasons. But one is that it spreads it out, so that you can have a senior mentor that's playing the sponsor role that can just connect you to things that you need help getting connected to, whereas a peer mentor can answer, questions when you're starting on the faculty that you may think are silly and you don't really want to ask your chair, like what's this tenure thing about, things that become pretty common when you're in the faculty, but are pretty mysterious when starting. At least they were to me. The whole thing of even some of the policies we have that I struggle with, like we still have the policy that only tenured faculty can on the award of tenure. And I always say, reflecting from my own personal experience, I was not allocated an additional set of knowledge when I became tenured. Why is it we have those kind of rules? And so some of it sounds like, medieval aristocracy sort of stuff. Even the rule you can only vote on a promotion to your level, or below. And it's like that sometimes just being kind of from a blue collar family, this seems all a little bit silly. Nonetheless, the rules are the rules, and, we have to do a good job preparing our faculty to be successful. And so I just find that, in mentorship, I can get people to at least participating in it a little bit, because most people, you don't have to have them reflect very long, and they realize that they all had mentors, and had they not had those people, the trajectory of their career would have been quite different. Mm-hmm. In the same way, and, it's not as robust in the literature, but a lot of what Sandy Frazier does in our professional development officer is when mentorship goes bad, it can be pretty awful. And I think sometimes even in our faculty affairs group, we aren't authentic about this relationship requires some minding too. And we need to have a process for when people get into dysfunctional relationships that they can, have an avenue to get some assistance, because particularly with the really junior faculty and some of the postdocs, when they get into dysfunctional relationships, they can be pretty distressing. So, but
operationally, can you explain to us how these mentor teams are assembled and monitored and how they evolve? Can you help us understand that better?
Yeah, so what I have done is a faculty development tool. When I came here and I would have workshops and people were very encouraging that I should be doing it, and then no one would appear, I changed my strategy. And the strategy that I took was adopted from Khan's Academy, the Saul Khan, who was the originator of this Khan's Academy, which has aspiration to provide a high quality education to the world for free, which made any of my daily problems seem pretty insignificant. But I heard him speak actually at the AAMC meeting, and he has a really cool story. In fact, he has a book I would recommend for people to read about kind of how he developed his model, but it was based around YouTube. And so doing 10-minute little narrated presentations is what I've done. And so for example, for promotion and tenure, I created a lot of little short presentations that I would just narrate in my office and then put online for people to see. And so it talks about our process and preparing your portfolio. And I've gotten a lot of good, feedback, and it's something I can direct people to. Mm-hmm. For mentorship, I did the same thing. And so I had reviewed the available literature, and this idea of the team was everybody should have a team of at least 3 people. And there's different language around this concept. So this is not something I created. Some people call it a leadership or a mentorship constellation and other fancier words. But what I did is to take the traditional idea of mentorship and deconstruct it. And I said, okay, mentors, they connect you to important things. They provide you practical advice, particularly in the research community. And then they can talk to you about, silly things or things that you might perceive as silly. So the model that I am advocating is that your team would have a senior mentor that you might meet with twice a year and talk about, hey, is my career tracking in the direction, and hey, by the way, I need to get in this prestigious society of which you're a member. How do I do that? Can you make connections? A peer mentor that you can just talk to about everyday things, and then like methodologic mentor, and that's better described for research faculty, like, what's your progression in the NIH? When do I get my K award? When do I need to apply for my R level? Those kind of things. It's less well described for the physicians, and I would encourage people, though, to think about that particularly in your first 5 years of practice, how do I navigate through this? What happens the first time I get, a notice of malpractice? I mean, so we still need those people. It's just less well developed. The major disadvantages of the model is you might get differing advice, and so particularly for young faculty, you have to say you're probably going to get differing advice. The reasons that I advocate this model is, number one, it's less time-consuming for the mentors. This can be coffee twice a year, but also it solves the problem there's some interesting discourse in the academic women's literature about this, that there's a disconnect for younger academic women faculty and more senior academic women faculty because kind of the landscape has changed. I mean, we have had success in terms of the number of women, but when young women will go to more senior women and sometimes ask them about how am I going to manage, having children and that sort of thing, they don't find that the advice they get is very helpful because the senior women, many times that were the first of their gender, in a group, had to do things differently. And so I think it's really important to get a diverse group of perspectives around these kind of issues, and just recognize that kind of the landscape is rapidly changing. I know when my wife went part-time when our second son was born, she was told principally by her senior mentors who were women, you're committing career suicide. You'll never be taken seriously if you do this. And now that was, a generation ago, but I think you're still going to find that attitude expressed, and maybe there's value to it. But I just think as we're getting much more diverse amount around most of the features that we think about, that it's really important to get multiple perspectives. Right. And I think how, people identify has become quite diverse. And so, it takes a team. It's going to be rare for you to find a single person that you say, hey, that's what I want to be, and I'm just going to attach myself to them, which is, to me, the old model, right, of mentorship.
So whose responsibility is it to assemble this team?
Yeah, it's a great thing. So in our unit, it's mostly the chairs. We were asking them in the departmental reviews to tell us, what we gave them the information. This is your average satisfaction with mentorship. What are you doing? Do you have a plan? So they're held accountable at the departmental level. So I try to put all these resources centrally. And then we try to let them have latitude because our departments are quite diverse in terms of size, scope, mission, and but we do ask the chairs to be responsible, for at least the general satisfaction.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And is there an annual review process where the faculty are invited to give some feedback on their satisfaction with this mentoring?
There is. So, we, like everywhere else, kill our faculty with surveys. So we have the president and the university does a campus engagement survey, and then the Senate does a survey. They alternate between the president and deans and the chairs. And then UAB Medicine also does it. So we were doing it annually, but it just became ridiculous in terms of the amount of kind of duplicated effort. So we've actually gone to every other year to just do our ones focused on the School of Medicine. But, it's not to say there are questions. I just did our campus engagement, and I found that which, is a vendor that deals more with general universities, but there were several questions in there about work-life integration. And so clearly, I think we'll derive information even from that survey that can help us. But
how have you thought about the mentoring side? So sounds like you've got a nice infrastructure built from the bottom up, from the mentee's perspective. And I'm curious about from the mentor's perspective. And I'll tell you, at Hopkins, it's not terribly uncommon that I'll run across a senior faculty member who will express some amount of frustration with all the new faculty and fellows and trainees being recruited. And then there's a small cadre of really good mentors that all those mentees are beating down their door to get to them. And this is another one of those uncompensated efforts. And yes, they're in academia and they love it and they have a heart for helping develop future leaders. And yet there is a certain number of hours in the day, and these senior faculty themselves are up against the same pressures as junior faculty. They're still, they're feeling the crunch for research funding and on Epic and trying to chart their patient encounters and closing records and regulatory compliance, work modules and things. So they have those same pressures, and yet they have these junior folks who are, will you be my mentor, mentor me. So I'm curious if you've thought about looking at this from the mentor's perspective and how you help, first of all, recognize that effort. And also you mentioned, equipping leaders. How do you address the capacity or the capability rather of mentors to make sure mentors are actually doing good mentoring?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and it's one of the things that in terms of the wellness that has motivated my involvement in that, because I do feel that we have so burdened our faculty with regulations, whether they're coming from research or from the clinical enterprise, that just the opportunity for collegial interactions is really gotten squeezed out of academics, and things like mentorship, I think are under great distress. What we do, part of what we do is in conjunction with our School of Graduate Studies, in that, NIH and others are, I think continually elevating the bar. They clearly, have an interest in making sure that people are properly prepared for the mentoring role. So, we have several programs that are principally for the research faculty about mentorship. Some of those are done in our CCTS, and some of them are available in our graduate school. For example, they have a certificate for leadership and mentorship. Mm-hmm. At the school level, we do list mentorship as a specific activity that is acknowledged and respected in terms of promotion and tenure. And so the way our promotion and tenure process works is, to be in a tenure earning track, you have to show excellence in two areas, and those can be of the three of teaching and research and service. And so mentorship is, listed quite explicitly as a valued thing that can be done. I think, in terms of a lot of what we do, and I think most faculty development, faculty affairs people would agree with this, we operate through, persuasion and cajoling and that sort of thing. I think with our leaders, our more enlightened leaders understand the value of it. And as I mentioned, we do try to hold the chairs accountable for what are they doing. I mean, they have the same, kind of regulatory environment we're all living in. So I think we're sensitive to that. Because we're research intensive, I think it helps a little with this in that you can tell that the expectations around mentorship development are increasing. And while that is represent a burden, when you see someone in a dysfunctional mentoring relationship, I tell you, it kind of gets you on board for saying we've got to get people prepared and we do have to monitor this circumstance. Mm-hmm. To me, this is the biggest thing about the mentoring team model and I would say to people is, look, unless you're this person's principal methodologic mentor, then it's not going to be that time consuming. If you're very senior, you may be able to say to people, what is it you're seeking in a relationship? So I would encourage people to get a little bit more precise in saying, what is it exactly? If you're wanting to come in my lab and I'm going to be helping you principally from your research, then to me, there's got to be mutuality in that, in terms of, and kind of watching how that relationship works, not being a scientist that, you bring somebody on, whether it's an assistant faculty or even a postdoc, that you do have to embrace it. There's a developmental journey that you're going on with people. What I tell the mentees is you need to take care of your mentor. If you have a good mentor, you have a very precious commodity, and maybe today even more so than ever. And you need to, help that person advance their work. We're in a tough time. And, a lot of I don't see it so much with the junior faculty, but with some of the postdocs, you hear stories where they kind of go off the ranch and kind of want to do their own thing. I think some preparation of both of the parties in that circumstance to say, look, if someone's agreed to be your mentor, you've just gotten a gift. You need to treat the gift with respect. And that person doesn't need to be tracking you down. You need to be setting up the meetings. And there's good literature that shows that when the mentee drives the relationship, those are the best relationships. And so I think even telling a mentor, just because you agree doesn't mean you've made a lifetime commitment to somebody. And if they're not responsive, then, it may be a time to say, look, let's review expectations. I don't have time in life to be tracking you down, and bugging you about deadlines and those sort of things. That's not the world we live in anymore, if it ever was. So,
yeah, agreed. We have a mentoring contract that we have mentees. We encourage mentees and mentors to come and review that contract annually and renegotiate and talk about exactly what you said, expectations about who's setting the meeting agendas, follow up, accountability, responsibility, and using time respectfully. So we're very attuned to that too. So I totally agree.
That's good. I like that idea.
Yeah, you mentioned something, two things that I really wanted to dig a little deeper about that I was intrigued. You talked about the military model. You said in academic medicine, we have a lot to learn from the military model of leadership and how in any branch of the service, once you reach a certain rank, you're already being prepared for the next rank. And that's gotten me thinking, I mean, how would you envision or how might we adapt that really thoughtful, very almost linear, well, yeah, it is a linear progression of title and rank in an environment where there aren't, you don't just come to a certain point of years in service in academic medicine where you will go from lieutenant colonel, et cetera, and there's only one of each of those ranks. In the military, anybody can be those ranks, whereas in academic medicine, you can count on two hands sometimes the number of deans and assistant associate deans, and so we don't have that that capacity for flooding folks at different titles. So how might that look for us? Do you have any thoughts?
So the first thing I'll say is in my world it's flat, and so I really ascribe to the servant leader model. And what I tell everybody is that the sort of the sacred work in academic medicine is when the clinician provides a service to the patient, when a teacher, facilitates learning for the student, and when, new discoveries are made or refined. And so the bigger the title, to me, the lower the position. So I'll just clarify that. I also believe that, we need to have conversations with people that come into leadership roles to say, some of the decision is like, how close do you want to live to that action? And so for some people, I don't want to end up in the dean's office because I want to be, really involved in those sort of things. And I think that's fine, and that we should encourage that. I think the mistake that we make many times is we give people leadership roles, or even just titles as an effort to, retain them, that they're really gifted in one way or the other. And so we give them these things. And the problem is they have followers, so they're impacting people. And I've seen plenty of examples in all the places I've been of, dysfunctionality when people aren't properly prepared for those roles. I think the way it might work, like I do a thing with the surgery residents through the American College of Surgeons every year, and I expose them to a couple of fundamental concepts in leadership. And a lot of these people are junior surgery residents, and so the big work there is convincing them that they are already leaders. And I tell them, I bet you if I were to go visit your place, you already have a reputation. Like if you're an intern, you probably already have a reputation among the students. Mm-hmm. And so just be aware you're impacting people, right? And so you got to pay attention a little bit to at least some fundamentals of leadership. But I think everybody in their annual performance review, particularly when they start taking on, leadership roles, we ought to be saying to them, what is it you need now? But then what are you thinking? Where would you like this to lead? Do you imagine that you would want to go into, in a role where it's more programmatic? One of the reasons I like practicing surgery is that the change I affect as a surgeon is profound, is individual, is quite intimate in many times in what I do. I mean, people give their children to me literally to operate on, but it's also eminently measurable. I mean, I can tell this is going well and maybe this is not going so well. In the job that I do in organizational change, it requires an unusual amount of talking to get any change started, and takes a lot of effort to sustain it. It feels like a lot of it's outside of my control. If I have a department chair that's not convinced, I get very much limited in what I can accomplish. And it's so diffuse that sometimes you can't tell, like, are we there yet? Have we finished? And so, I think what I would say to anyone who was, in a starting thing that was interested in my roles is that you just have to learn to accept that it's going to take months and years to affect change. And if it gets into a culture change, maybe a decade. And so you just have to understand that.
Yeah.
So the other thing I think we can all do to help is I very much believe that we should all have terms and term limits, because I do think that there are a limited number of these roles, and that the quality of the work is improved if we all, step down and step back into the faculty, not necessarily change institutions or retire, but we return to the faculty. I really think that's a lot of good things that come out of that model.
I love that diversity, including new generations and newer ways of thinking, and just freshening up perspective and changing the lens through which you look at things. I really like what you said about, leadership and fundamental concepts, and how you really try to imbue in your surgeons this idea that you're already a leader. And we do that as well with our junior faculty members in one of our early junior leadership programs, is we remind them that, think back when you were a student or a postdoc or a resident or fellow and you looked up to assistant professors, someone as a professor, you're that person. You already are a leader to your patients and the folks in your lab and staff and colleagues and other trainees who are coming up. People, as Luann Thorndike always says, as a leader, people are taking your temperature all day long. They're watching you. They're looking at you. So behave as if you are a leader, because in fact you are. And I was talking to a woman today who was interviewing for a position with us at Hopkins, and we were talking about leadership programs. And she said, It's not necessarily that when I went through that leadership program that I was, hell bent on being the next dean or even the chairman of my department. She said, I knew pretty quickly that I didn't want that. But what that leadership program did equip me with was this courage to explore other leadership positions. And through her gaining some skills and experiencing networking, she really got the confidence to go apply for this U that only 2 were awarded in the country. And it was like 8 institutions, this big U grant that was multi-millions that she said she never would even thought of. She's just from a smaller university and she's already at the top of the pack with a couple RO1s, and the institution had never before competed for a U grant, and she got it. And she completely credited that to the experience of being a leader in a leadership program where, as we talk about, it's not necessarily, I love that you said it's, the higher, the bigger the title, the lower the position, that we're not training people necessarily to be the next insert big title, but to embed this sense of servant leadership, as you said. How can I serve? And that can be through my science and through my education and from growing my practice and being a clinician of excellence. So broadening that scope, I think, is those of us who do this understand the value that sometimes it's hard to measure and to market it or talk about an return on investment on that kind of an experience.
Yeah, I think I agree with all that. I think that is one of the advantages is that we're diversifying the portfolio of what things can do. So, like we're starting these, or expanding our kind of clinical pathways, which I see sort of as cross-cutting to the departments. And I think that's quite healthy, in terms of, I just think we have a lot of people that have capacity around. And I think in some cases, just exposure to the idea of, leadership is, to me, a lot about influencing people in positive directions. And so it's a pretty broad construct. Yeah. But I think that's why some of these things, and that's why I like to start with the residents, is exposing to them that the ideas, that there are definitely leaders that have a positive impact on their follower group, and then there are styles that don't. In some sophistication. I'm a big believer in situational leadership. And so in a crisis, one type of leadership is quite effective, but, it doesn't work so well. I tell the surgeons, what we might have to do in a crisis in the operating room is probably not the best approach in Starbucks, if the line's long. So having some sophistication about your group and your task and your context, I think is a really healthy, way to look at it. So one of the things that we do that is good for my soul and for people that are in the faculty affairs role is every year we do a Dean's Excellence Award, and we give awards in the kind of 3 durable missional areas of service, teaching, and research. But we also give one in enhancing diversity and also in mentorship. And the reason they're lovely is that you get these just unbelievable people that are doing just amazing things, and they're just also happy to be at UAB, and they reflect just great humility and great respect for their collaborators. And it's just these aren't the people that we get to know sometimes, and so it's just a reminder that that's the great majority of the faculty are out doing amazing things, and they just we just aren't aware of them. So it's kind of good for your soul, if for nothing else. So
I love the Dean's Excellence Awards. I love that because it not only honors and recognizes the servants around us who are dedicated and passionate and who just quietly sometimes go about their business and don't want or seek the attention, but it also, builds the culture and raises the profile and tells the community this is something we value. So these kinds of awards, when I first got into faculty development, I thought, oh my goodness, this is, we don't have time for this, and nobody wants a luncheon, nobody wants a banquet, nobody wants a happy hour where awards are given out. And I was building that that assumption on the fact that we'd have so many other fill in the blank kinds of activities and seminars and workshops and trying to have networking events that were poorly attended. I'm thinking of those, minute, like matchmaking, speed mentoring sessions. And, people kind of go and it's like going to a new restaurant. There's a big rush and then they die off. And I always thought, no one's going to come to this. Oh my gosh. The first time we had an award ceremony, it was standing room only. The food was wiped out. I thought, are you kidding me? And it really gave a message to me that, people care about, people want to celebrate the efforts that they make, the things that go above and beyond. And they really appreciated the fact that we were noticing it. That people were,
that's right.
I notice you. People don't necessarily call you out, but we do notice the good work you do with mentoring. We do notice the work you do with diversity. And that really kind of stunned me as a off the chart T thinker on the Myers-Briggs. I thought, I guess this feeling stuff does matter. It really raises the profile of what the institution values. And I think those are very important. I love that you do that.
I think the word that's critical in there is notice. And so one of the things that I do is whenever we see announcements from the university newsletter or from the School of Medicine newsletter where faculty have won a national award or wherever, I always email those people and just said, hey, just a note to say congratulations. And it was interesting because I had a fairly junior faculty member wrote back and said, wow, this is, I've never gotten a note from the dean's office. And you're like, wow, we're just knuckleheads like everybody else.
Right.
And yet
who knew that people are noticing these things? Yeah.
Right. And so this idea of noticing, that I think that goes a long way actually to preserve some civility in what we're doing is to, even when I talk with people that are contemplating filing a grievance or otherwise distressed, sometimes just Sandy Frazier in my office does this as well, just letting them talk it through. Then they just feel like, okay, somebody cared enough to let me tell my whole story without interrupting me or, and to me that is just a big thing that people can do.
Providing a space. Yeah. There's a woman who I followed up after she passed away at Hopkins, Lisa Heiser, and people still talk about her as she's an angel on earth and how she used to write handwritten notes and cards to everyone. And I thought I could never fill her shoes, and I'm not a note writer, card writer. I mean, I would give my husband cards right from the drugstore from CVS in the bag, or we'd go I'd say, it's your birthday, let's stop and run into Walgreens. Pick out a card I would have given you. So I have to work hard at the feeling part. But there was all these lovely stories of what a wonderful person she was. And I thought, I just can't do that. So, but what I do is shoot quick emails. Like you said, I have subscribed to all the different departments' newsletters, and many of them have newsletters and blogs and weekly updates. And so I really religiously scroll through all of them, and any of the faculty members who've been through our leadership programs and seminars and workshops and coaching sessions and people with whom I've built a relationship, I always obnoxiously reply with a huge font, congratulations, woohoo, awesome, great job. And I'm telling you, within T-minus 10 seconds, I get a reply going, thanks, Kim. And I thought, oh my gosh, this whole thing about people have so many emails and they don't reply and they don't have time. But you send someone a congratulations, you're a rock star, you're knocking out of the park. They appreciate that you're picking them out of the crowd. And like you said, I see you. I notice you. You're doing great work. It's tough and you're doing it. So they seem to like it. And it's just a simple 10-second, email reply.
No, that's right. I completely agree.
What else? Would you have any interesting stories or something else you'd like to talk with us about today?
I just, it's been interesting for me, as I told you in my story, I came in, thinking I would do faculty development. And I do think that it's interesting when I first started going to the GFA meetings that it was encouraging that the the people there are just, good people. And the way I describe it is, one of the books I use to talk about for leaders is called Reframing Organizations by Bowman and Deal. And it talks about looking at organization across 4 frames. And one of them is what they call the human resource frame. But it's like, how do we treat people? And so I call it the people frame. And so I think what I have found among, the people that are active there is that, people really do care about people that are in the organization. They have different areas of interest or whatever, but I think that's the fundamental is that in these roles, you just have to be advocating for people. I always say instead of chief wellness officer, the better title would be the chief of we should be more strategic about how we treat people officer, because that's a lot of where the burnout is coming from, is we've allowed through a variety of mechanisms the burden associated with regulation and those sort of things to have really squeezed out a lot of what is good about academics. And part of my passion for this role is, to me, it's been a wonderful life. To be an academic physician has been unbelievable. I've gotten to go all over the country and to places all over the world and, share little things that I've learned. And, what a fabulous experience that I would wish for everybody. And so I'm committed to trying to get us rebalanced back where people have time to do those kind of things. And, for UAB, we have physicians here that are offering services that are otherwise not available in a state, that has its own set of struggles. And so, I think we have to celebrate kind of the totality of what we do in academic medicine. So now I do sometimes say that, I love people, but on some days it's kind of more of an abstract kind of love. So I do think that self-care is important in these roles, because you do absorb a lot of, distress that people are feeling. And I think you have to, understand the limits of what you can and cannot do, and that it's important as you kind of empathize with people that you have your own support, system to help people. And that's what I find, about the meetings is when we come together, I think you get some ideas, but mostly it's just, having that time together and kind of appreciating what we're all trying to do in terms of making sure people are properly treated. So it's been a lovely journey.
Well, thank you, David. We've been listening to David A. Rogers, Senior Associate Dean in Alabama, pediatric surgeon, servant leader, chief people person, married to an incredibly brilliant physician scientist. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Kim.
Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. The mission of the Faculty Factory is to build and support a community of leaders in faculty development who share tools, resources, wisdom, and encouragement in service to our faculty members, schools, and institutions. We encourage you to go to facultyfactory.org to find out more. Get in touch with me, ask me any questions. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. We'll see you next time. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine Office of Faculty. For more information, visit facultyfactory.org.